You think poverty is just about empty pockets, don't you? About sleeping rough and begging for coins? Of course you do. That's the sanitized version they taught you. But tonight, while you scroll through your phone, comfortable in your ignorance, I'm going to show you what really happened when entire civilizations decided that the sick, the poor, and the unwanted weren't just inconvenient, they were contagious. And when I'm done, you'll never look at a homeless person on the street the same way again, because what I'm about to tell you isn't ancient history. It's a blueprint that keeps getting dusted off and reused. Picture this. You're walking through the cobblestone streets of medieval Europe and the smell hits you first. Not just unwashed bodies or rotting food, but something deeper, more primal. Fear has a scent, you know. It seeps from pores like sweat, mingles with desperation, and creates this thick, choking atmosphere that clings to everything. The beggars line the streets like broken furniture, their hands extended not just for alms, but for the basic human acknowledgement that they still exist. Their eyes follow you with a hunger that goes beyond food. They're starving for dignity, for the simple recognition that they're still part of the human race. But here's where your comfortable assumptions crumble. Those beggars weren't just ignored by medieval society. They weren't just overlooked or pitied. They were systematically hunted, categorized, and eliminated in ways that would make modern genocide seem amateur in comparison. Because medieval minds had figured out something terrifying. If you can convince people that poverty is a disease, then you can justify treating the poor like plague carriers. The church, that beacon of compassion you learned about in school, had developed an entire theology around this concept. They called it the corruption of the flesh through sin. Beautiful, isn't it? They took Jesus' own message about caring for the poor and twisted it into something that would make him weep blood. According to their doctrine, physical poverty was evidence of spiritual corruption. And spiritual corruption? Well, that was contagious. More contagious than any plague. Because it could spread through proximity, through touch, through the very air that surrounded these human wreckage. So they created systems. Oh, such elegant systems. The first step was always identification. Beggars were forced to wear specific colors, specific badges, specific markings that would identify them from a distance. Sound familiar? It should. Every genocide in history starts with making the unwanted visible, marking them like cattle before slaughter. In London, they wore yellow badges. In Paris, it was red cloth tied around their arms. In Florence, they carved symbols into wooden tokens that hung around their necks like millstones. But identification was just the appetizer. The main course was categorization, and this is where medieval bureaucracy showed its true genius for cruelty. They didn't just see beggars as one homogeneous mass of misery. Oh no, that would be too simple, too merciful. They created elaborate taxonomies of human suffering, each category with its own specific fate. First, you had the able-bodied poor. These were the ones who could work but couldn't find employment, usually because there simply wasn't enough work to go around. In a sane world, society might have addressed this through job creation or economic reform. But medieval minds had a more direct solution. If you can work but don't, then you're choosing to be a burden. And burdens, well, burdens get eliminated. Then came the diseased poor. Well, these were the lepers, the plague victims, the mentally ill, anyone whose condition was visible and frightening. Society's response to them was isolation, but not the kind of medical quarantine you might imagine. This was isolation designed to accelerate death, to make suffering so complete that death became a mercy. The criminal poor were perhaps the most tragic category, because their crimes were usually nothing more than stealing bread or sleeping in the wrong doorway. But once labeled criminal, they became fair game for every sadistic impulse that civilized society usually kept hidden. Their punishment wasn't just about justice, it was about entertainment, about giving the general population a sanctioned outlet for their own buried cruelties. And finally, the foreign poor. Beggars from other cities, other countries, other religions. These were the easiest targets because they had no local connections. No one to speak for them, no one to remember them when they disappeared. They were ghosts before they died, which made their actual deaths remarkably easy to ignore. The Purges themselves followed patterns that would be repeated across centuries. It always started with rumors, whispered conversations in taverns about beggars spreading disease, about crime rates rising, about foreign infiltrators poisoning wells or corrupting children. The rumors would spread faster than any actual plague, creating a fever of fear that demanded action. Then came the declarations. Official proclamations from whatever authority ruled the area, announcing new policies for public health and safety. These weren't presented as persecution, of course. They were public service announcements, community health initiatives, patriotic duties. The language was always clinical, always reasonable, always necessary. The roundups happened at dawn, always at dawn when the beggars were most vulnerable, huddled together for warmth in whatever shelter they'd managed to find. Armed men would sweep through predetermined areas like fishermen casting nets, scooping up anyone who fit the predetermined categories. The beggars rarely resisted. After all, resistance implied they had something to lose, and people who have nothing don't fight. They just disappear. What happened next depended on the specific purge, the local authorities, and how creative they felt like being. Some cities simply expelled their beggars, forcing them to become someone else's problem. These were the merciful purges, if you can call systematic displacement merciful. The beggars would be herded to the city limits and told never to return, left to wander from place to place until they found somewhere that hadn't yet decided to clean house. Other cities were more permanent in their solutions. Mass graves outside city walls tell stories that no official records bothered to document. Archaeological evidence suggests that some medieval communities killed their beggars with the same methodical efficiency they use for slaughtering livestock. Quick, clean, economical. No muss, no fuss, no guilty consciences. But the most insidious purges were the ones that maintained a veneer of charity while ensuring slow death. Workhouses that worked people to death. Hospitals that were really prisons. Charitable institutions that provided just enough food to prevent immediate starvation while ensuring long-term malnutrition. These places could kill hundreds while maintaining the fiction that society was helping its most vulnerable members. The psychological mechanisms that made these purges possible are the same ones operating today. It starts with dehumanization, the gradual process of convincing people that certain human beings aren't really human at all. Medieval society accomplished this through religious doctrine, but the principle remains unchanged. Once you convince people that some humans are less human than others, you can justify doing anything to them. Then comes the rhetoric of contamination. The idea that undesirable people spread their undesirability like a virus, corrupting everything they touch. Medieval people believed this literally, thinking that poverty and disease were morally contagious. Modern people are more sophisticated in their fears, but the underlying mechanism is identical. We still talk about certain populations infecting neighborhoods, spreading social problems, contaminating communities. The final step is always the same, presenting cruelty as kindness, genocide as therapy, elimination as healing. Medieval authorities convinced themselves they were saving souls by destroying bodies. They were performing acts of mercy by ending misery. They were protecting society by removing its burdens. And here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. These weren't monsters. These were ordinary people, probably people very much like you, who convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. They went to church, loved their families, worried about their children's futures, and participated in systematic murder without losing a single night's sleep. The beggars knew what was coming. They always knew. You can see it in the few surviving accounts from those who managed to escape or hide. They describe a kind of collective resignation that settled over the beggar communities when the signs appeared. The increased patrols, the new proclamations, the way ordinary citizens stopped making eye contact. The beggars could smell their own approaching doom the same way animals smell forest fires. Some tried to run, of course. They would flee the cities for the countryside, hoping to disappear into forests or abandoned villages. But rural areas had their own purges, their own ways of dealing with unwanted populations. And winter made survival nearly impossible for people who were already weakened by malnutrition and disease. Others tried to transform themselves to somehow escape their designated categories. They would steal clothes, forge documents, create false identities. But poverty leaves marks that are hard to erase. Malnutrition changes your teeth, your posture, your skin. Disease leaves scars that no amount of stolen finery can hide. And medieval society was small enough that strangers were automatically suspect. The few who survived the purges carried trauma that lasted generations. They passed down stories, warnings, survival strategies to their descendants. But they also passed down something else. The knowledge that civilized society's commitment to protecting its vulnerable members is always conditional, always temporary, always subject to revocation when circumstances change. But this story, this systematic elimination of the unwanted during times of social stress, it didn't die in medieval Europe. Next time you see a homeless person being moved along by police, or hear politicians talking about cleaning up the streets, or watch communities rally to keep shelters out of their neighborhoods, remember those dawn roundups in medieval cities. Remember how easily ordinary people convinced themselves that cruelty was compassion, and ask yourself how little we've really changed, if we've changed at all. You want to know the truly terrifying part? The part that makes your comfortable modern existence feel like walking on quicksand? Those medieval purges weren't chaotic massacres driven by mob hysteria. They were bureaucratic masterpieces, administrative achievements that would make modern governments weep with envy. Every elimination was documented, every death was justified, every atrocity was filed away in triplicate with the proper seals and signatures. Let me walk you through the machinery of medieval mercy, because understanding how they built these systems tells you everything you need to know about how quickly your own civilization could implement something similar. And before you shake your head and mutter about how we've evolved, remember that the 20th century perfected these techniques beyond anything medieval minds could have imagined. The key innovation wasn't violence. Violence is easy, messy, inefficient. The real breakthrough was legitimization. Medieval authorities discovered that you could commit any atrocity as long as you wrapped it in enough paperwork and moral justification. They created entire bureaucracies dedicated to the systematic categorization and elimination of human beings, and they staffed these bureaucracies with ordinary people who went home to their families each night believing they were serving God and society. Take the position of beggar examiner, a real job that existed in dozens of medieval cities. These weren't thugs or executioners. They were often educated men, sometimes clerics, tasked with determining which beggars deserved elimination and which deserved temporary mercy. They had manuals, guidelines, standardized forms for recording their decisions. They took pride in their thoroughness, their attention to detail, their ability to make difficult but necessary distinctions. The examination process itself was theater designed to provide moral cover for predetermined outcomes. Beggars would be brought before these examiners and subjected to questioning that revealed nothing about their actual circumstances and everything about society's need to justify what it was about to do to them. Can you work? If yes, then you're choosing to be a burden. If no, then you're defective and need to be removed. Do you have family? If yes, then they should be caring for you, and your presence here proves moral corruption. If no, then you're alone and expendable. Are you from the city? If yes, then you're a known failure. If no, then you're a foreign contamination. Every question was a trap, every answer a justification for elimination. The examiners weren't seeking information. They were performing a ritual that transformed murder into administration, genocide into public health policy. But the real genius of medieval purge systems lay in their distribution of responsibility. No single person was responsible for deaths, which meant no single person had to carry the psychological burden of mass murder. The magistrate who ordered the roundup was just enforcing existing law. The guards who collected the beggars were just following orders. The examiners who categorized them were just doing their jobs. The executioners who killed them were just carrying out sentences. Each person in the chain could point to someone else and say, "I didn't decide this. I was just doing my part." This fragmentation of responsibility served another crucial function. It prevented moral questioning from taking root. When everyone is responsible, no one is responsible. When everyone is just following procedures, no one has to examine whether the procedures themselves are monstrous. The system becomes self-sustaining, self-justifying, immune to individual conscience because individual conscience is irrelevant to institutional momentum. Medieval records reveal the banality of these administrative evils in language that should make your blood freeze. Listen to this entry from a 14th century London register. Examined 12 vagrants today. Found 3 suitable for labor assignment, 4 recommended for hospital containment, 5 determined unsuitable for rehabilitation. Dispatched accordingly. Weather fair. Good day for processing. Dispatched accordingly, as if human beings were invoices being filed or livestock being sorted. The hospitals mentioned in these records weren't places of healing. They were death factories designed to kill slowly enough to maintain the fiction of charity. Medieval hospitals for the incurable poor had mortality rates approaching 100% within the first year. This wasn't medical failure. This was medical murder disguised as compassion. The daily routine in these institutions reveals methodical cruelty that would shame concentration camps. Morning prayers thanking God for the opportunity to serve the unfortunate, followed by breakfast rations, calculated to maintain life just long enough to justify the expense. Work assignments designed to exhaust already weakened bodies. Medical treatments that accelerated rather than treated disease. Evening prayers asking for God's mercy on souls that would soon be meeting their Maker. The staff at these institutions weren't monsters either. They were nurses, doctors, administrators, chaplains, people who had dedicated their lives to caring for others. But the system they worked within had transformed care into killing, healing into harm, mercy into murder. And most of them never recognized the transformation because it happened gradually, through small compromises and minor justifications that accumulated into massive atrocities. This is how normal people become willing participants in genocide, not through dramatic conversion to evil, but through incremental normalization of cruelty. First, you accept that some people deserve less consideration than others. Then you accept that these people are somehow responsible for their own suffering. Then you accept that helping them might actually be harmful to them and to society. Finally, you accept that eliminating them is actually an act of mercy, a difficult but necessary kindness. Medieval society perfected this psychological progression through religious doctrine that made suffering seem spiritually meaningful. If poverty was evidence of sin, then relieving poverty might interfere with divine justice. If disease was divine punishment, then curing disease might be opposing God's will. If death was a release from earthly corruption, then causing death might be performing God's work. But they also used secular justifications that sound remarkably familiar to modern ears. Economic arguments about resource allocation and social efficiency, medical arguments about preventing the spread of disease and genetic defects, political arguments about maintaining order and protecting productive citizens, legal arguments about enforcing existing laws and respecting property rights. The language changes across centuries, but the underlying logic remains constant. Some people are more valuable than others, and society has the right to eliminate those who contribute nothing and consume resources. Medieval people said this was God's will. Modern people say it's economic necessity or public health or social justice. The words change. The corpses remain the same. What made medieval purges particularly insidious was their integration into the normal functioning of society. These weren't extraordinary measures implemented during crises. They were routine administrative procedures, as regular and unremarkable as tax collection or street maintenance. Cities had purge seasons, usually in late autumn when winter would make survival difficult for anyone expelled from urban areas. They had purge budgets, allocating funds for guards, transportation, documentation, disposal. They had purge specialists, people whose careers were built on efficient elimination of unwanted populations. The seasonal nature of these purges reveals their calculated cruelty. By timing eliminations to coincide with harsh weather, authorities could kill without directly killing, eliminate without obviously eliminating. Exposure, starvation, and disease would do the actual work of death while allowing officials to maintain that they had simply relocated people, not murdered them. Records show that medieval authorities tracked the effectiveness of their purges with the same attention to detail that modern corporations use to analyze market. They measured reduction in beggar populations, decreases in petty crime, improvements in public health indicators, increases in property values in formerly afflicted areas. They compiled reports celebrating successful eliminations and analyzing failures to maintain effectiveness. Some cities even developed competitive relationships around their purge efficiency. Florence bragged about eliminating its beggar population faster than Milan. London officials studied Parisian techniques for improving their own elimination rates. Venice exported its purge methodology to other Italian city-states like a consulting service. This competitive element transformed mass murder into a matter of civic pride. Cities that eliminated their unwanted populations efficiently were praised for their administrative competence and moral clarity. Cities that failed to purge effectively were criticized for weakness and corruption. Success was measured in corpses, but celebrated as social progress. The children growing up in these societies learned to see purges as normal, necessary, even beneficial. They absorbed the language of elimination, the logic of categorization, the moral framework that made genocide seem like good government. By the time they became adults, they couldn't imagine society functioning any other way. And here's what should terrify you most. Those children weren't uniquely susceptible to this indoctrination. They were just children, with the same capacity for empathy and moral reasoning that children have always possessed. But they grew up in systems that channeled their natural human impulses toward normalized cruelty. They learned to care about the right people and dismiss the wrong people. They learned to see suffering as sometimes deserved and sometimes necessary. They learned that good people sometimes have to do terrible things for the greater good. These lessons don't disappear when societies claim to have evolved. They just go underground, waiting for the right combination of crisis and opportunity to resurface. The infrastructure of elimination gets dismantled and rebuilt. The justifications get updated and refined. But the fundamental human capacity for systematic cruelty remains constant across centuries. Next time you hear someone explaining why certain people deserve their suffering, or why helping them would actually be harmful, or why tough love requires withholding compassion, remember those medieval children learning to see purges as progress. Remember how easily moral education becomes moral corruption when the system itself is corrupt. And wonder what lessons your own society is teaching its children about who deserves to live and who deserves to disappear. But you want to know how they actually did it, don't you? How they transformed living, breathing human beings into statistics and ledger books. How they engineered death on an industrial scale centuries before anyone had heard the word industrial. Because understanding the methodology is what separates historical curiosity from historical warning. And what I'm about to show you isn't just medieval ingenuity. It's a blueprint that gets refined and reused every time civilization decides it has too many inconvenient people. The first innovation was architectural. Medieval cities didn't just stumble into efficient elimination, they redesigned their urban spaces to facilitate it. Take the concept of pest houses, which sounds almost quaint until you understand their actual function. These weren't medical facilities. They were killing machines disguised as hospitals, designed with features that would make modern crematoriums seem inefficient. The buildings themselves told the story. Single entrances that could be easily monitored and sealed. No windows on the ground floor to prevent escape attempts. Thick walls that muffled sounds from reaching neighboring structures. Interior layouts that funneled people towards central areas where they could be efficiently processed. Drainage systems that could handle large volumes of liquid waste. And always, locations downwind from residential areas so that the smell of death wouldn't disturb paying citizens. Inside these architectural monuments to systematic murder, medieval administrators developed procedural innovations that would be studied and refined by future genocides. The intake process alone reveals sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation and crowd control. New arrivals were separated immediately upon entry, preventing the formation of resistance groups or mutual support networks. Families were split apart not through cruelty, but through administrative necessity. Men went to one area, women to another, children to a third. The old and sick went directly to what officials euphemistically called comfort wards. The comfort wards were masterpieces of medical murder. Patients received regular visits from physicians who documented their declining condition with scientific precision. They were given medications that accelerated rather than treated their illnesses. They received food carefully calculated to maintain consciousness while ensuring malnutrition. They were kept clean and comfortable enough to maintain the fiction of a care while being systematically poisoned, starved, and neglected to death. What made this particularly diabolical was the genuine relief many patients felt upon arrival. After months or years of sleeping rough, facing constant harassment, struggling with untreated illness and persistent hunger, a clean bed and regular meals felt like salvation. Many beggars actually thanked their executioners, blessed the institutions that were killing them, praised God for finally providing mercy in their darkest hour. The physicians working in these facilities weren't monsters. They were healers who had been taught that some healing required death, that some mercy required murder, that some love required elimination. Their medical training had prepared them to preserve life, but their social conditioning had taught them that some lives weren't worth preserving. The cognitive dissonance created by this contradiction was resolved through elaborate theological and philosophical justifications that transformed killing into healing. Medieval medical texts from this period reveal the intellectual gymnastics required to maintain professional identity while practicing systematic murder. Doctors wrote detailed treatises on merciful termination and therapeutic elimination. They developed clinical terminology that disguised murder as medicine, accelerated natural conclusion, assisted divine intervention, compassionate transition facilitation. They created elaborate protocols for determining when continued treatment was contrary to divine will or impeding spiritual progression. But the pest houses were just one component of a larger elimination infrastructure. Medieval cities also developed mobile elimination units, traveling death squads that could process unwanted populations without the expense of permanent facilities. These units operated like medieval food trucks, except instead of serving meals, they served death. The mobile units were particularly effective in rural areas where permanent facilities weren't economically viable. A team of specialists would arrive in a village, set up temporary processing stations, eliminate the local unwanted population, and move on to the next location. They carried portable equipment, folding examination tables, standardized forms, basic medical supplies, disposal tools. Everything needed to transform living people into bureaucratic statistics. The specialists themselves were often itinerant professionals who made their living traveling from city to city, offering elimination services to local authorities. They developed reputations for efficiency, discretion, and thoroughness. Some specialized in particular types of elimination: disease-based, starvation-based, exposure-based, trauma-based. Others were generalists who could adapt their methods to local preferences and available resources. These traveling exterminators maintained detailed records of their work, not just for payment purposes, but for professional development. They analyzed success rates, experimented with new techniques, shared best practices with colleagues. They treated mass murder as a craft to be perfected, a skill to be refined, an art to be mastered. Their records reveal innovation that would make modern efficiency experts proud: time and motion studies of elimination procedures, cost-benefit analyses of different killing methods, quality control measures to ensure consistent outcomes, customer satisfaction surveys from hiring authorities, performance metrics that measured success in corpses per day, cost per elimination, client retention rates. The most successful elimination specialists developed signature techniques that became their professional trademarks. One practitioner perfected a method of induced pneumonia that killed reliably within 7 days while appearing completely natural. Another specialized in nutritional elimination, calculating precise starvation diets that maintained consciousness until the final day while ensuring inevitable death. A third developed psychological techniques that convinced victims to refuse food and medical care, essentially talking them into suicide while maintaining plausible deniability. But individual innovation was less important than systematic methodology. Medieval elimination infrastructure operated according to principles that would be recognized by any modern operations manager. Standardized procedures ensured consistent outcomes regardless of location or personnel. Quality control mechanisms prevented waste and maintained efficiency. Supply chain management ensured that elimination materials were available when and where needed. Performance monitoring identified successful techniques and eliminated ineffective practices. The supply chains themselves reveal the economic integration of mass murder into normal medieval commerce. Specialized vendors supplied elimination facilities with everything from restraints to poisons to disposal equipment. Accountants tracked elimination expenses and calculated per unit costs. Architects designed buildings optimized for processing human beings. Engineers developed mechanical devices to improve elimination efficiency. Merchants competed for lucrative elimination contracts. This economic integration had a crucial psychological effect. It normalized mass murder by making it profitable. When elimination became a business, eliminating people became a job. When it became a job, it became routine. When it became routine, it became invisible. The horror disappeared into the mundane mechanics of commerce and administration. Medieval records show that some cities actually made money from their elimination programs. They charged fees for processing unwanted populations from other jurisdictions. They sold the belongings of eliminated people. They harvested useful body parts for medical research and industrial applications. They recycled elimination byproducts into fertilizer, soap, and other commercial goods. Death became a revenue stream. Murder became a profit center. The most successful elimination programs were those that maintained multiple revenue streams while minimizing operational costs. Efficient processing reduced overhead. Systematic harvesting maximized byproduct value. Strategic timing took advantage of seasonal demand fluctuations. Bulk processing achieved economies of scale. Vertical integration eliminated middleman costs. But economic efficiency wasn't the only consideration. Medieval elimination specialists also understood the importance of public relations and social acceptance. They developed elaborate rituals and ceremonies that transformed mass murder into community celebration. Elimination events were scheduled to coincide with religious holidays and civic festivals. They featured music, food, entertainment, and inspirational speeches about social progress and divine justice. The community involvement served multiple functions. It distributed responsibility across the entire population, making everyone complicit in the killing. It normalized elimination by associating it with positive social experiences. It provided emotional release for collective anxieties about social problems. It reinforced social hierarchies by demonstrating what happened to people who fell too far down the social ladder. Children were specifically included in these elimination celebrations, not as accidental witnesses, but as intentional participants in their moral education. They were taught to see elimination as necessary, righteous, even festive. They learned songs about cleansing society of corruption. They played games that simulated the identification and removal of undesirable people. They were rewarded for reporting suspicious behavior in neighbors and relatives. This childhood indoctrination created generations of adults who couldn't imagine society functioning without regular elimination of unwanted populations. For them, mass murder wasn't an aberration or emergency measure. It was basic social maintenance, as routine and necessary as garbage collection or sewer cleaning. The technical sophistication of medieval elimination systems reveals planning and investment that spanned decades. These weren't spontaneous outbursts of violence or temporary responses to crisis. They were permanent features of social organization, infrastructure projects that required long-term commitment and substantial resources. Archaeological evidence supports the documentary record, revealing elimination facilities that operated continuously for centuries. Mass graves with systematic organization, suggesting standardized disposal procedures. Architectural remains showing repeated modifications and improvements to increase processing capacity. Material evidence of specialized tools and equipment designed specifically for efficient killing. But perhaps the most chilling evidence is what's missing from the archaeological record. Personal effects, individual graves, monuments, or memorials acknowledging the deaths of eliminated people. They were systematically erased, not just from life, but from memory, from history, from human recognition. They died twice, once in their bodies, once in the collective consciousness of their society. The erasure was intentional and thorough. Official records were destroyed or altered to eliminate evidence of elimination programs. Survivors were relocated to prevent testimony. Witnesses were incentivized to forget through bribes, threats, or their own complicity. Alternative historical narratives were created to explain population reductions through natural causes rather than systematic murder. This institutional amnesia wasn't just about covering up crimes. It was about preparing for future crimes by eliminating precedents that might generate resistance or moral questioning. If people couldn't remember previous eliminations, they couldn't learn from them, couldn't recognize the warning signs, couldn't organize against them. And here's the part that should make you examine every civic celebration you've ever attended, every community improvement project you've ever supported, every social problem you've ever wanted solved through decisive action. Those medieval elimination festivals weren't aberrations. They were templates. The technology has improved, the scale has expanded, the efficiency has increased, but the fundamental structure remains unchanged. Communities still gather to celebrate the removal of unwanted people. They still involve their children in the moral education. They still transform murder into progress, elimination into improvement, genocide into civic virtue. Next time you see a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new development that displaced a homeless encampment, or hear applause for policies that make life impossible for unwanted populations, or watch communities celebrate the cleansing of their neighborhoods, remember those medieval festivals. Remember how ordinary people learned to cheer for mass murder. And ask yourself what elimination technologies your own society has perfected while you weren't paying attention. You think I'm speaking in abstractions, don't you? drawing connections that exist only in paranoid imagination. Let me give you names, dates, places. Let me show you specific elimination programs that actually happened, documented in records that survive today, preserved by bureaucrats who were so proud of their efficiency they wanted posterity to admire their work. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't speculation or interpretation. It's testimony from the grave, written in the careful handwriting of medieval accountants who measured success in human corpses. London, 1349. The great mortality had passed, leaving the city's population decimated, but its beggar problem somehow worse than before. The surviving poor had flocked to the city from the countryside, creating what official records called an infestation of unproductive elements. City authorities, led by Mayor Richard de Ashby, implemented what they termed the Great Cleansing, a systematic elimination program that would serve as a model for other English cities. The London system began with the establishment of 3 processing centres: St. Bartholomew's for the diseased poor, Bethlehem for the mentally afflicted, and a new facility called Domus Misericordiae for what they euphemistically called rehabilitation candidates. Each facility was designed for specific elimination methods, creating a specialized assembly line of death that could process different categories of unwanted people with optimal efficiency. St. Bartholomew's records, preserved in the London Metropolitan Archives, reveal the medical murder methodology in clinical detail. Dr. Geoffrey Montfort, the facility's chief physician, developed what he called accelerated natural progression protocols. Patients diagnosed with treatable conditions were given treatments guaranteed to worsen their symptoms. Those with untreatable conditions were provided with comfort measures that ensured swift decline. The mortality rate at St. Bartholomew's during this period was 97.3% within 6 months of admission. What makes Montfort's records particularly chilling is their tone of medical professionalism. He describes his elimination techniques with the same clinical detachment modern doctors use to discuss surgical procedures. Patient presents with mild respiratory distress, administered willow bark tincture laced with mercury compound. Condition deteriorated as expected. Natural progression accelerated successfully. Patient expired on schedule. Procedure deemed successful. He wasn't a sadistic monster. He was a healer who had been taught that some healing required killing. Meanwhile, Bethlehem was pioneering techniques for eliminating the mentally ill through what they called therapeutic neglect. Patients were provided with minimal food, no heating, and constant exposure to stress-inducing environments. Those who became violent were restrained in positions that ensured gradual suffocation. Those who became catatonic were left in their own waste until infection killed them. Those who remained lucid were subjected to treatments designed to drive them to suicide. But the most innovative facility was Domus Misericordiae, which specialized in eliminating able-bodied beggars through work programs designed to kill. The facility operated under the fiction of rehabilitation, claiming to transform idle beggars into productive citizens through the dignity of labor. In reality, it was a death camp disguised as a vocational school. The work assignments were calculated to exceed human endurance while maintaining the appearance of reasonable employment. 12-hour shifts, breaking stones with inadequate tools, digging drainage ditches in winter weather without protective clothing, moving heavy materials up and down stairs until cardiovascular systems collapsed. The work itself was often pointless, designed for elimination rather than production, but it provided moral cover for systematic murder. Workers who collapsed from exhaustion were diagnosed with constitutional weakness and transferred to medical facilities for treatment. Workers who refused assignments were classified as willfully idle and subjected to punishment regimes that ensured death within weeks. Workers who complained about conditions were labeled seditious and eliminated immediately as threats to public order. The London program eliminated approximately 12,000 people over 3 years, reducing the city's beggar population by an estimated 89%. The cost per elimination was calculated at roughly 2 shillings, making it more economical than expulsion or long-term imprisonment. City authorities were so pleased with the results that they published a manual describing their methods, which was distributed to other English municipalities seeking solutions to their own beggar problems. But London's approach was conservative compared to innovations developed in continental Europe. The Italian city-states, with their sophisticated banking systems and mercantile expertise, transformed elimination into a profitable industry that attracted investment and generated substantial returns for shareholders. Venice, in particular, developed what historians now recognize as the first corporate genocide program. The Compagnia della Purificazione was established in 1367 as a joint stock company specializing in population cleansing services. Investors purchased shares that entitled them to profits from elimination contracts with various Italian cities. The company went public in 1374, trading on the Venetian exchange alongside spice importers and textile manufacturers. The Compagnia's business model was elegant in its simplicity. Cities would contract with the company to eliminate specified numbers of unwanted people within agreed timeframes. The company would deploy elimination teams, process the targets, and deliver documentation proving contract fulfillment. Payment was structured per successful elimination, creating powerful incentives for efficiency and thoroughness. But the real innovation was the Campagna's development of elimination tourism. Wealthy citizens could purchase packages that allowed them to observe elimination procedures as entertainment. These purification tours included transportation, lodging, meals, and guided observation of various elimination methods. Customers could even request specific elimination techniques or participate in certain procedures for additional fees. The tourism element served multiple functions beyond revenue generation. It normalized elimination by transforming it into entertainment. It educated the wealthy about elimination techniques they might want to implement in their own jurisdictions. It provided emotional release for social anxieties about unwanted populations. And it created a constituency of customers who had invested money and time in elimination programs, making them resistant to moral questioning or policy changes. Venice wasn't the only Italian city to commercialize elimination. Florence developed a subscription service that provided regular elimination of unwanted populations for a monthly fee. Milan created an elimination lottery where citizens could purchase tickets for chances to win the right to specify particular targets for elimination. Genoa established elimination banks that provided loans for municipal purification programs, with eliminated populations serving as collateral. The Italian innovations spread rapidly throughout Europe, adapted to local customs and legal systems. French cities developed elimination cooperatives where citizens could pool resources to fund larger purification programs. German cities created elimination guilds that maintained professional standards and trained new elimination specialists. Spanish cities integrated elimination programs with inquisition procedures, creating hybrid systems that eliminated both religious and social undesirables simultaneously. But perhaps the most sophisticated elimination program was developed in the Low Countries, where Dutch administrative efficiency combined with Flemish financial innovation to create what modern analysts would recognize as a fully integrated elimination infrastructure. The Dutch approach wasn't limited to individual cities or regions. It was a national system that coordinated elimination programs across multiple jurisdictions, sharing resources, expertise, and targets to achieve optimal efficiency. The Dutch system began with the Algemeen Zuivering Administratie, a central bureaucracy that maintained comprehensive databases of unwanted populations throughout the Low Countries. Every beggar, vagrant, diseased person, and social undesirable was cataloged with detailed information about their location, condition, and elimination priority. This information was updated regularly through reports from local officials, traveling agents, and citizen informants. The database enabled strategic planning that was impossible under previous elimination systems. Authorities could track population movements, predict seasonal variations in unwanted populations, coordinate elimination campaigns across multiple cities, and measure program effectiveness through statistical analysis. They could identify elimination targets who had escaped from other jurisdictions, prevent unwanted populations from relocating to avoid elimination, and ensure that elimination programs didn't interfere with each other. The Dutch also developed the first elimination futures market, where cities could purchase contracts guaranteeing elimination services at future dates. This allowed municipalities to budget for elimination programs years in advance while providing elimination specialists with predictable revenue streams that enabled long-term business planning. The futures market also enabled speculation, where investors could profit from predicting future elimination demand or betting on the success of particular elimination programs. The financial sophistication of Dutch elimination programs attracted international attention and investment. English merchants purchased shares in Dutch elimination companies. French nobles invested in Flemish elimination futures. German bankers provided capital for expanding elimination infrastructure. Elimination became a legitimate asset class, traded alongside traditional commodities and securities. This financial integration had profound psychological effects. When elimination becomes an investment, investors develop emotional and economic stakes in its success. When elimination generates dividends, shareholders actively support policies that increase elimination demand. When elimination profits appear in portfolios alongside other legitimate investments, it becomes psychologically indistinguishable from any other business activity. The Dutch system also pioneered elimination insurance, where individuals and institutions could purchase policies protecting them against losses from elimination program failures. Cities could insure against the costs of elimination program overruns. Elimination specialists could insure against liability from elimination accidents. Even potential elimination targets could purchase policies protecting their families against economic losses from their own elimination. Insurance transformed elimination from a moral question into a risk management problem. Instead of asking whether elimination was right or wrong, people asked whether it was properly insured. Instead of questioning elimination policies, they negotiated premium rates. Instead of opposing elimination programs, they demanded better coverage for elimination-related risks. The culmination of Dutch elimination innovation was the development of elimination bonds, securities backed by future elimination revenues that could be traded on international markets. These bonds allowed investors throughout Europe to profit from elimination programs without direct involvement in elimination activities. A merchant in London could earn returns from beggar elimination in Amsterdam without ever seeing an elimination facility or knowing the names of the people being killed. The bonds also enabled elimination program expansion by providing capital for new facilities and equipment. Cities could finance elimination infrastructure through bond sales rather than taxation, making elimination programs more politically palatable to citizens who didn't want to pay directly for mass murder, but were willing to let investors profit from it. But the most chilling aspect of these historical elimination programs wasn't their efficiency or profitability. It was their ordinariness. These weren't emergency measures implemented during crises. They were routine administrative procedures, as normal and unremarkable as tax collection or street maintenance. They were integrated into the fabric of medieval society so completely that most people couldn't imagine civilization functioning without them. Children grew up expecting annual elimination seasons. Merchants planned their businesses around elimination-related commerce. Professionals built careers on elimination expertise. Investors included elimination securities in their portfolios. Governments budgeted elimination expenses alongside other municipal services. Elimination became so normal that not eliminating unwanted populations would have seemed strange, irresponsible, even immoral. The normalization was so complete that when economic conditions improved and elimination programs became less necessary, many communities actually missed them. Citizens complained about declining social order without regular elimination of troublemakers. Merchants mourned the loss of elimination-related business opportunities. Professionals lobbied for continuation of elimination programs to preserve their livelihoods. Investors demanded government intervention to protect their elimination-related investments. This psychological attachment to elimination systems created political pressure for their continuation even when the original justifications disappeared. Elimination had become not just a solution to social problems, but a social institution that people depended on for economic, psychological, and moral benefits. Eliminating elimination became harder than eliminating people. And here's what should keep you awake tonight. Examining every social program you've ever supported, every policy you've ever voted for, every improvement you've ever wanted for your community. These medieval elimination programs didn't disappear because humanity evolved beyond them. They disappeared because economic conditions changed enough to make them temporarily unnecessary. The infrastructure remained. The expertise remained. The psychological acceptance remained. The financial mechanisms remained. They were just waiting for the right combination of crisis and opportunity to return. And when they did return, in new forms with new justifications using new technologies, the people implementing them could point to centuries of precedent, mountains of documentation, libraries of expertise, and generations of moral acceptance. They weren't inventing new horrors. They were reviving old solutions that had worked before and could work again. Next time you hear someone propose a comprehensive solution to homelessness, or efficient processing of undesirable populations, or innovative approaches to social cleansing, remember Venice's elimination tourists and Dutch elimination bond. Remember how easily mass murder became legitimate business, profitable investment, entertaining spectacle. And ask yourself whether the finance, technology, and administrative systems of your own society could be adapted for similar purposes. Because they already have been. You just haven't been paying attention to what they're financing, processing, and administering. Here's where your comfortable historical distance collapses entirely, where the medieval past reaches through centuries to grip your throat with skeletal fingers. Because those elimination systems didn't fossilize in dusty archive. They evolved, adapted, modernized. The DNA of medieval purges flows through the bloodstream of contemporary civilization, pumping the same toxic solutions through different organs, but toward identical outcome. You want proof? You want the connecting tissue that links those Venetian elimination tourists to modern reality? Let me trace the bloodline for you, generation by generation, showing you how medieval innovations became modern standard operating procedures. Because the people who perfected mass elimination weren't primitives stumbling toward cruelty. They were innovators whose techniques were so effective that they've been continuously refined and implemented for 7 centuries. The Dutch elimination database I described, it never disappeared. It evolved into modern population registries, social service databases, immigration tracking systems. The same information that medieval authorities used to identify elimination targets is now collected, stored, and analyzed by contemporary governments with digital efficiency that would make those Dutch bureaucrats weep with envy. Your social security number, your credit score, your medical records, your employment history, your residential patterns, your family connections, your political affiliations, your consumer habits, your digital footprint. Every data point that medieval elimination specialists could only dream of having, modern authorities possess in real time, updated continuously, accessible instantly. The categorization systems that divided medieval beggars into elimination priorities have become the eligibility requirements for modern social services. Able-bodied versus disabled, deserving versus undeserving, citizen versus alien, compliant versus resistant, productive versus burdensome. The language has been updated, the criteria refined, but the fundamental purpose remains unchanged. separating people who deserve social support from people who can be eliminated without moral consequence. Modern homeless services, mental health systems, addiction treatment programs, disability services, immigration processing, criminal justice procedures, child welfare interventions. Every contemporary system that claims to help vulnerable populations uses categorization methods pioneered by medieval elimination specialists. The only difference is efficiency. Medieval authorities needed armies of clerks to maintain their records. Modern systems can categorize millions of people automatically, identifying elimination candidates faster than any medieval bureaucrat could imagine. But categorization was just the foundation. The real innovation was the transformation of elimination from obvious murder into systemic neglect, administrative complexity, and institutional failure. Medieval elimination specialists discovered that you could kill people without laying hands on them, that you could commit genocide through policy rather than violence, that you could eliminate unwanted populations by making their lives impossible rather than ending them directly. Modern homelessness policy is medieval elimination methodology with updated branding. Hostile architecture that makes sleeping impossible, ordinances that criminalize basic survival activities, permit requirements that prevent shelter construction, zoning laws that exclude affordable housing, administrative barriers that make accessing services impossible, waiting lists that ensure people die before receiving help, means testing that punishes poverty, work requirements that ignore unemployment, residency requirements that punish mobility, sobriety, requirements that ignore addiction, compliance requirements that punish mental illness, every obstacle placed between homeless people and housing, every bureaucratic requirement that delays assistance, every policy that makes survival more difficult, every regulation that reduces available services, every procedure that dehumanizes help-seeking, every system that transforms basic human needs into administrative problems is a direct descendant of medieval elimination techniques. The genius of modern elimination systems is their distribution across multiple agencies and jurisdictions, making individual responsibility impossible to assign and systemic responsibility invisible to participants. No single person or organization kills homeless people. They just die from exposure, untreated illness, violence, despair, and exhaustion while navigating systems designed to ensure those outcomes. The homeless services provider who maintains impossible eligibility requirements isn't a murderer. The zoning board that blocks shelter construction isn't committing genocide. The police officer who confiscates survival equipment isn't eliminating people. The healthcare system that discharges vulnerable people to the streets isn't practicing medicine, but the cumulative effect is identical to medieval elimination programs. Unwanted people disappear. The financial mechanisms pioneered by Dutch and Italian elimination programs have evolved into modern social impact investing, public-private partnerships, and performance-based contracting for social services. Investors can still profit from eliminating unwanted populations, but now they call it outcome-based funding, pay-for-success financing, and evidence-based intervention. The language has been sanitized, but the underlying structure remains unchanged. Private capital generating returns from processing human beings classified as social problems. Modern homeless services are structured as elimination industries that generate revenue from managing rather than solving homelessness. Service providers receive funding based on the number of people processed, not the number of people permanently housed. Contractors profit from maintaining rather than reducing homeless populations. Investors earn returns from managing rather than eliminating the conditions that create homelessness. Everyone involved has financial incentives to perpetuate the problems they claim to solve. This creates the same psychological dynamic that made medieval elimination programs so persistent. People develop economic, professional, and emotional stakes in the continuation of systems that kill the people they claim to help. Ending homelessness would eliminate the homeless services industry. Solving addiction would destroy the addiction treatment business. Curing mental illness would bankrupt the mental health system. Reducing poverty would collapse the poverty management economy. The tourism element of Venetian elimination programs has evolved into disaster tourism, poverty tourism, homelessness tourism. Wealthy people pay for guided tours of homeless encampments, addiction treatment facilities, mental health institutions, low-income housing projects. They attend charity galas, celebrating their support for organizations that manage rather than solve the problems that create their entertainment. They participate in volunteer activities that make them feel good about themselves, while perpetuating the systems that create the problems they're volunteering to address. Modern elimination tourism is more sophisticated than its medieval predecessor. Instead of watching people die directly, tourists watch them die slowly through institutional neglect, while congratulating themselves for their compassion. Instead of purchasing tickets to elimination events, they purchase tax-deductible donations to elimination organizations. Instead of entertainment, they receive moral satisfaction and social status from their participation in systems that kill people gradually rather than immediately. The insurance mechanisms, developed by Dutch elimination specialists, have evolved into modern risk management systems that protect institutions from liability for elimination outcomes while ensuring their continuation. Homeless service providers purchase insurance against lawsuits from people they fail to serve. Healthcare systems insure against liability from people they discharge to die on the streets. Cities insure against legal challenges to policies that make survival impossible. Police departments insure against civil rights violations committed during elimination operations. Insurance transforms elimination from a moral issue into a business expense. Organizations don't ask whether their policies kill people. They ask whether they're adequately insured against the costs of killing people. They don't evaluate the humanity of their procedures. They evaluate the liability exposure of their procedures. They don't measure success by lives saved. They measure success by lawsuits avoided. The bonds that financed medieval elimination programs have evolved into municipal bonds, social impact bonds, and securitized social service contracts that allow investors to profit from elimination programs without direct involvement in elimination activities. Pension funds, insurance companies, university endowments, and individual retirement accounts include securities backed by systems that eliminate unwanted population. Millions of people earn returns from elimination programs without knowing that their investments are financing them. This financial integration creates the same psychological dynamic that made medieval elimination bonds so effective. People develop financial stakes in elimination systems that make moral questioning economically threatening. Challenging policies that kill homeless people means challenging investments that fund retirements. Opposing systems that eliminate unwanted populations means opposing securities that pay for college tuition. Fighting elimination programs means fighting financial systems that millions of people depend on for economic security. But the most sophisticated evolution of medieval elimination methodology is the transformation of elimination from something done to people into something people do to themselves. Medieval elimination specialists discovered that you could reduce operational costs and moral responsibility by convincing targets to participate in their own elimination. Modern systems have perfected this technique through learned helplessness, systematic demoralization, and the internalization of elimination logic by elimination targets themselves. Homeless people learn to see their homelessness as personal failure rather than policy outcome. Addicted people learn to blame themselves for addiction rather than question systems that profit from addiction. Mentally ill people learn to accept inadequate treatment as appropriate care rather than demand systems that actually heal. Poor people learn to see poverty as individual deficiency rather than systemic exploitation. The victims of elimination systems learn to see their elimination as natural, deserved, even beneficial. This psychological manipulation is more efficient than any medieval elimination technology because it makes people complicit in their own destruction while absolving elimination systems of responsibility for elimination outcomes. People aren't killed by elimination systems. They die from their own poor choices, personal failures, individual inadequacies, genetic defects, moral weaknesses, behavioral problems, lifestyle decisions. The ultimate evolution of medieval elimination methodology is its complete invisibility to the people implementing it. Medieval elimination specialists knew they were killing people and justified it through religious and social doctrine. Modern elimination specialists don't recognize that they're killing people because the killing happens through systemic neglect rather than direct violence, through institutional failure rather than intentional murder, through policy outcomes rather than operational procedures. Social workers who process homeless people through systems designed to fail them don't see themselves as elimination specialists. Healthcare providers who discharge vulnerable people to certain death don't see themselves as executioners. Police officers who confiscate survival equipment from dying people don't see themselves as torturers. City officials who implement policies that make survival impossible don't see themselves as genocidal administrators. They're just doing their jobs, following procedures, implementing policies, providing services. This moral invisibility makes modern elimination systems more dangerous than their medieval predecessors because they operate without conscious intent, moral questioning, or systematic opposition. Medieval elimination programs required active justification and continuous moral reinforcement. Modern elimination systems operate automatically, requiring no justification because their elimination function is invisible to their operators. The result is elimination systems that are more efficient, more comprehensive, more persistent, and more morally insidious than anything medieval minds could have imagined. They kill more people, more systematically, more completely, and more permanently than any medieval elimination program while maintaining complete moral invisibility and social acceptance. You participate in these systems every time you vote for politicians who promise to clean up the streets, every time you support organizations that manage rather than solve homelessness, every time you invest in funds that include elimination-based securities, every time you donate to charities that perpetuate the problems they claim to address, every time you advocate for policies that make unwanted people disappear rather than addressing the conditions that make them unwanted. And here's the part that should shatter every comfortable assumption you've ever held about your own moral identity. You probably support elimination systems while believing you oppose them. You probably invest in elimination programs while thinking you're fighting them. You probably vote for elimination policies while imagining you're supporting humanitarian alternatives. Because modern elimination systems are designed to provide moral cover for participants, allowing them to believe they're helping while they're actually harming, caring while they're actually killing, solving while they're actually perpetuating. The systems are so sophisticated that they transform elimination into charity, genocide into social work, mass murder into public service. Next time you see a homeless person die on the street outside a fully funded homeless services building, remember those medieval elimination specialists who perfected the art of killing through institutional neglect. Next time you read about waiting lists for life-saving services while administrative costs consume most program budgets, remember those Dutch elimination bonds that allowed people to profit from processing human misery. Next time you watch politicians celebrate comprehensive solutions that eliminate problems by eliminating people, remember those Venetian elimination tourists who paid to watch systematic murder disguised as social progress. The methodology hasn't changed. Only the marketing has improved. So here we are, at the end of our journey through 7 centuries of refined cruelty, standing at the precipice of what comes next. And what comes next should terrify you more than everything you've already learned, because the elimination systems I've described aren't the final evolution of this technology. They're just the current iteration of a methodology that continues to evolve, adapt, and improve with each passing decade. The artificial intelligence systems being deployed to manage social services aren't neutral technological tools. They're automated elimination specialists, programmed with the same categorization logic that medieval bureaucrats used to sort people into life and death categories, but operating at digital speed with algorithmic precision that would make those Dutch administrators weep with envy. Machine learning algorithms trained on historical data inherit centuries of elimination bias, automating discrimination with mathematical certainty, while providing the perfect moral cover of technological objectivity. When an AI system denies someone housing assistance, cuts their disability benefits, flags them for additional scrutiny, or prioritizes their case at the bottom of waiting lists, it's implementing decision trees grown from roots planted in medieval elimination programs. The bias isn't a bug in the system. It's the system working exactly as designed, carrying forward centuries of accumulated wisdom about which people deserve to live and which people can be allowed to die. But artificial intelligence is just the beginning. The real breakthrough is coming through the integration of elimination systems, with biotechnology, genetic analysis, predictive modeling, and social credit scoring. Imagine medieval elimination specialists with access to genetic markers that predict addiction susceptibility, algorithms that identify future mental health crises, databases that track every social interaction and financial transaction, biometric systems that monitor stress responses and behavioral patterns in real time. The precision targeting possible with these technologies will make medieval categorization systems seem crude by comparison. Instead of sorting people into broad categories like diseased poor or able-bodied vagrant, future elimination systems will be able to identify specific individuals for elimination based on genetic predispositions, behavioral predictions, social network analysis, and algorithmic assessment of their probability of becoming social burdens. The moral cover will be even more perfect than current systems provide. Genetic counselors will recommend against pregnancies that might produce children with elimination-worthy characteristics, framing genocide as reproductive choice. Predictive algorithms will identify future addiction risks, allowing society to eliminate people before they become addicted, disguising prevention as early intervention. Social credit systems will deny services to people whose behavioral patterns suggest future noncompliance, transforming elimination into incentive-based behavior modification. But the most insidious development isn't technological. It's psychological. Each generation that grows up with elimination systems becomes more accepting of elimination logic, more comfortable with elimination outcome, more creative about elimination methodologies. The children who are learning to see homeless people as inevitable urban features rather than policy failures, who accept that some people will always die from treatable conditions, who consider mass incarceration a natural response to social problems, who view refugee camps as permanent solutions rather than temporary emergencies. These children aren't being taught to recognize elimination systems. They're being taught to operate them. They're learning to manage human misery rather than eliminate it, to profit from social problems rather than solve them, to classify people as deserving or undeserving of basic survival resources. They're being prepared to implement elimination technologies that haven't been invented yet, using justifications that haven't been articulated yet, targeting populations that haven't been identified yet. The normalization is so complete that opposing elimination systems has become psychologically difficult even for people who recognize them. How do you fight systems that provide your employment, generate your investment returns, fund your social services, secure your neighborhoods, educate your children, and protect your lifestyle? How do you challenge methodologies that are integrated into every aspect of contemporary civilization, embedded in every institution you depend on, woven into the fabric of social organization itself? The answer is that you probably can't. And that's exactly what makes modern elimination systems so much more dangerous than their medieval predecessors. Medieval elimination programs could be stopped by changing rulers, reforming laws, modifying policies, redirecting resources. Modern elimination systems are so integrated into the basic functioning of contemporary civilization that challenging them means challenging civilization itself. This integration creates a psychological trap that makes moral resistance nearly impossible. People who recognize elimination systems operating around them face a choice between comfortable complicity and devastating resistance. They can continue participating in systems they know are killing people, or they can reject those systems and sacrifice their own security, prosperity, and social acceptance. Most choose complicity, convincing themselves that their individual participation doesn't matter, that the systems would operate without them, that their resistance wouldn't change anything anyway. But complicity isn't passive acceptance. It's active participation in the refinement and expansion of elimination systems. Every person who works within these systems, while recognizing their true function, contributes expertise, legitimacy, and moral cover that makes the systems more effective and more durable. Every professional who implements elimination policies, while believing they're providing humanitarian services, helps perfect the moral invisibility that makes elimination systems socially acceptable. The professionals operating within modern elimination systems aren't monsters. They're people very much like the medieval physicians who perfected medical murder while believing they were practicing healing. They're social workers who genuinely want to help people while working within systems designed to ensure help doesn't arrive in time. They're healthcare providers who truly care about patients while operating within institutions that profit from prolonging rather than curing illness. They're teachers who genuinely love children while working within educational systems that sort those children into success and failure categories that determine their lifetime opportunities. These professionals know that their systems don't work as advertised, but they've learned to attribute systemic failures to resource constraints, political obstacles, individual pathologies, and administrative limitations, rather than recognizing that the failures are actually successes, that the systems are working exactly as designed, that the apparent dysfunction is actually optimal function for elimination rather than humanitarian purposes. The few professionals who do recognize elimination systems for what they are, face the same psychological trap as everyone else, continue participating while trying to minimize harm, or abandon their careers and sacrifice their ability to help anyone at all. Most choose to stay within the systems, convincing themselves that they can do more good from inside than outside, that their individual resistance within the system is more effective than systematic resistance to the system. But working within elimination systems while trying to subvert them is like trying to perform surgery with tools designed for torture. The systems shape the people operating within them more than the people shape the systems. Professionals who enter elimination systems intending to reform them gradually adapt to their logic, internalize their assumptions, and adopt their methodologies. They don't transform elimination systems into humanitarian systems. They transform themselves into more effective elimination specialists. This psychological capture is so complete that many professionals within elimination systems become more committed to those systems than the people who designed them. They develop professional identities built around operating elimination systems effectively, personal relationships with colleagues who share their adapted moral frameworks, financial dependencies on elimination-based employment, social status derived from elimination-related expertise. Challenging elimination systems means challenging not just policies and procedures, but the professional identities, personal relationships, financial security, and social status of millions of people whose lives are built around operating those systems. This creates enormous institutional resistance to change that operates independently of any conscious commitment to elimination outcome. But the deepest psychological barrier to challenging elimination systems isn't professional or financial. It's moral. People who recognize that they're participating in elimination systems face devastating questions about their own moral identity. If they've been participating in genocide while believing they were practicing humanitarianism, what does that say about their judgment, their character, their fundamental decency? If they've been profiting from elimination systems while thinking they were fighting them, what does that say about their intelligence, their integrity, their basic competence? The psychological pain of recognizing complicity in elimination systems is so severe that most people choose denial over awareness. Comfortable lies over devastating truths, moral blindness over moral clarity. They protect their self-concept by refusing to see what they're participating in, maintaining psychological defenses that make recognition of elimination systems emotionally impossible. This willful blindness creates the perfect conditions for elimination systems to operate without opposition, expand without resistance, evolve without constraint. The people operating them don't see them. The people affected by them can't fight them. The people profiting from them won't challenge them. The people responsible for them refuse to acknowledge them. And meanwhile, the systems continue to refine their methodologies, expand their reach, increase their efficiency, and perfect their moral invisibility. Each iteration learns from previous mistakes, adapts to new conditions, incorporates new technologies, and develops more sophisticated justifications. Each generation of elimination systems is more effective than the last, more comprehensive in its reach, more resistant to challenge, more integrated into social organization. The trajectory is clear. Elimination systems that are currently eliminating thousands will evolve into elimination systems that eliminate millions, then hundreds of millions, then billions. The targeting will become more precise, the methodologies more efficient, the moral justifications more compelling, the social acceptance more complete. Future historians, if there are any, will look back at this period with the same horror that you feel when reading about medieval elimination programs. They'll wonder how people could have been so blind to systems that were so obviously designed to kill. They'll marvel at the sophisticated justifications used to rationalize obvious genocide. They'll study the psychological mechanisms that made mass participation in elimination systems possible, but they'll also recognize that the people implementing elimination systems weren't uniquely evil or unusually cruel. They were ordinary people, operating within systems that channeled ordinary human impulses toward extraordinary outcomes. They were people very much like you, faced with similar choices between comfortable complicity and devastating resistance, who chose complicity for the same reasons you're probably choosing complicity right now. Because that's what you're doing, isn't it? You're reading this while knowing that elimination systems are operating around you, while recognizing that you participate in those systems, while understanding that your participation contributes to outcomes you claim to oppose. You're experiencing the same psychological discomfort that medieval elimination specialists felt when confronted with the reality of what they were doing, the same cognitive dissonance that Dutch elimination investors felt when they calculated returns from human corpses. And you're probably resolving that discomfort the same way they did, by convincing yourself that your individual participation doesn't matter, that the systems would operate without you, that you can do more good by working within them than by challenging them, that resistance would be futile anyway. But here's the final secret, the one that should haunt every moment of comfortable sleep you ever have again. Elimination systems don't maintain themselves. They require continuous active participation from millions of ordinary people who convince themselves they're doing something else. They depend on professionals who implement elimination policies while believing they're providing humanitarian services. They need investors who fund elimination programs while thinking they're supporting social progress. They require voters who support elimination politicians while imagining they're choosing compassionate alternatives. Every elimination system in history has collapsed when enough people recognized what they were participating in and chose resistance over complicity. Every genocide has ended when enough ordinary participants decided that their comfort wasn't worth other people's lives. Every atrocity has been stopped when enough people decided that individual moral responsibility couldn't be dissolved in collective action. The elimination systems operating today will continue until enough people choose to see them clearly, acknowledge their participation honestly, and accept the costs of resistance courageously. The question isn't whether these systems can be stopped. The question is whether you'll be among the people who stop them or among the people who enable them to continue. The choice is yours. The corpses are waiting. The future is watching. And somewhere in a medieval archive, the ghost of a bureaucrat who once calculated the cost-effectiveness of human elimination is smiling, knowing that his methodology has survived 7 centuries and is finally approaching perfection. Choose carefully. Choose quickly. Choose while choosing still matters.